Hello everyone, at least I hope you can see me and hear me. And I guess let me know if the sound video seems weird. We realized that we didn't have the computer on the wired connection last time, so it was on wireless, so that may have been the problem, so I might have to take away the thing I did to fix the problem last week. Okay, I'm going to try taking it away, and we'll see if that matches it up. So now I'm testing again, and let me know if it still looks like a problem. Hello, Casmania, Kiros001, and Quindy, of course, Jedi Jared, Nepharsis. I hope you're all doing well. So I did have some other kind of technical problem right before we started, so I'm a little discombobulated now. But luckily I have some notes, so hopefully I'll be able to figure out what I was going to say. Hi, Otter Mama. So today what I want to talk about is ReaperCon, MSP Open, but also contests in general. So what I talked about that I would do last week is take a couple of figures and give them some critique that they might get after a contest, or if you asked a painter or a teacher or someone for some feedback, and try and put that into practice so that you can get an idea of some of the common problems that we see on figures and feedback that we often give to people before the contest. So you can try to address that and then maybe learn some new things that you can try to address to work your way up in the medal system. So I'm going to talk about the MSP Open specifically, but most of this is going to apply to any kind of contest, and even an online one. When I talk about, you see figures on a shelf in an online contest, it's going to be, little thumbnails on a page. So you're still competing visually with all the other little thumbnails or, little pictures that people might look at on Facebook or whatever web page you've entered a contest into. Online contests have the additional complication of you're dealing with people are judging your photo, or they're judging from your photo as well as your miniature, but that's like a whole other, maybe a different day to talk about that. I have a couple pieces. Some of them were from contests, some of them were from other things that I'll show, as well as the figures in question. And I'll probably do another show like this, or maybe talk about the contest a bit more. I don't want to spend a ton of time explaining the contest, but I know that there's, hi green users, Bob and Julie. I know that people often find it a little confusing, or they have questions. So the MSP Open is an open show, and that means that people bring in their entries, and you can bring in multiple entries. It's best if those are in some way different from one another. So you might have a creature and a player character, and maybe you painted a model, tank or something like that. So you have, well, that goes in a different category, but anyway, that's another story. You can set up a little display with your figures, and then the judges choose which one they're going to assess, and we are always choosing in your favor. So we're going to pick the figure from your display. You can have one, you can have 5. I wouldn't do too many more than 5. And sometimes you can do a group of figures. If you have a unit, you can submit that as one entry. But we're going to pick the thing that you did the best at, that you picked the best colors for, that you displayed the best painting skills at, and we're going to assess that and award it something from their certificate, bronze, silver, and gold. And as you go up the ladder, so this is a common confusion or thing that people get a bit concerned about, I think. It's not that, you come 4 years in a row and you're going to be at gold. The standard gets a lot tougher as you go up. So, the certificate standard is like this, the bronze standard is like this, the silver standard is like this, the gold standard is like this. There's always something to strive for. So we want it to be very encouraging. We want to recognize your hard work, but we also want to give you something to strive for, and for you to feel a sense of accomplishment when you do get a silver and when you do get a gold. So that's the nature of an open contest. There are other ones. Most of them are associated with military figure show societies. So there's the Atlanta Military Figure Show. There's one in Texas and one in Oklahoma. I think there's some others. I'll try to link to a web page with more information about that on my blog. I'm going to be talking about the contest a lot in the next few months on the blog too. Those aren't exclusive to military figures. So they call it fantasy, but it includes sci-fi, it includes horror, it includes things you've made yourself, it includes figures of all different scales and busts. So they're very welcoming at most of those shows. There's one in Chicago. That's the other one. MMSI is another one. And they use a similar system. Some shows are going to be a little tougher on what the qualifications are for silver or gold or whatever, and some shows are going to be a little more encouraging, I guess is the word I would use. But in all cases in the open, you're competing against a standard. You're competing against yourself. You're trying to improve yourself every year. We're not lining up the figures and only these top 3 win. So that's a top 3 or a podium or a game con type contest. And that's a tougher thing because you are competing with everything else that's there and you don't know until you get there what everything else is. So that's kind of, at a certain point, the judges have to start eliminating things for problems instead of picking things for positives. ReaperCon does have an element of that because we have the Sophie trophies. So those are only awarded to Reaper miniatures. Otherwise, you can bring in miniatures from whatever company you want, or models, or in 2019. I'm going to say last year for 2019 a bunch, I think, by accident, because my brain has just skipped over the part where there wasn't a ReaperCon. Like, how could there not be an in-person ReaperCon? And let's just skip over 2020, maybe. But someone had puppets that they'd made that were dragons that were gorgeous. Marika Reimer did a bas-relief kind of 3D picture thing, and those, all kinds of stuff like that is acceptable. We have some very creative and interesting entries, and that's one of the things I really love about the MSP Open is I get to see all these super cool things. But for the Sophie trophies, it's only Reaper figures. There could be, you know, some accents from other companies or something you 3D printed or whatever. And those are our top 3. So we'd look at all of the Reaper figures in the painter category, and we'd look at all the Reaper figures in the diorama and so on, and pick gold, silver, and bronze. And then some manufacturers may also have their own contests where their figures would be assessed in a similar way. And I believe, I don't know for sure who those are. I'm sure it's going to be on the forum and on the reapercon.com website. But I would very much expect Bombshell Miniatures to be there, among others. Excuse me. So I'm going to start doing the critique on a miniature, and then I'll talk a little more about the categories, because I don't want to get too boring with me just talking. But before I do that, does anyone have any questions about the MSP Open or what I just said about the MSP Open before I get into that? Hi, Valander. And Shadow Raven. Okay, I'm going to turn on another light then. Let's see. So that you can see the figures. So these are the 2 figures that I picked to do this exercise with. So I'm going to start with the blacksmith, and maybe I'll zoom in a little more. I try to pick a neutral gray background because I think that'll be easier to see. So I will just say one thing. When you go to the MSP Open, or even if you talk to someone at their desk and you ask for a critique, it's probably not going to be quite as thorough as I'm doing here, because we're trying to do 20 different things and talk to other people, and I had a lot of time to sit and look at these between last week and this week. So don't expect this level of critique. Also, I painted this and I don't mind harshing on myself, so I'm going to get into some nitty gritty just for the purpose of that. So just to be clear about that, this figure was sculpted by Bobby Jackson, and it is available in both bones and metal. So in bones it's 77142, and in metal it's in a pack of 3 with 2 other townsfolk, and it's 2584. Okay, so one of the nice things about being a judge in the contest is that we do get to spin the miniatures around and look at the other side. The MSP's Open, another nice thing about open shows is they put the figures out on tables. So you can kind of, go to the side or look at it from the other side, or there's no glass between you and the figure, and that's really nice. I enjoy that as a viewer. But then as a judge, I do get to spin things around because this guy actually kind of looks different from the back, and I'll have some comments with the bugbear for that too. Let's see if I can, nope, that's going to be in the way. I was trying to get the light a little closer, but hopefully that's enough light to see. So one thing, and this is minor, but so let's see. There are some chips on his bracer. There's just a couple. There might be maybe another couple of spots where something's missing. Don't freak out about that. If you pack your figure and it gets a chip when you unpack it or when you're putting it out on the tables or whatever, I as a judge, now I can't speak for all the judges, but I as a judge, I'm not going to dock a figure or consider it poor prep or whatever for just having a scratch or a ding. I'm going to assume that happened in transport. A more serious issue that he has is when I was painting the metals, I must not have noticed that I dragged the brush across there. And we all do that all the time. You'll end up with a little bit of blue or something on the skin from painting something else. But if you're going to enter a figure in a contest, that shows a level of carelessness that's not ideal. So I don't think it wouldn't like change the award that this guy got, but it was something to consider, and I'll want to repair that when I'm fixing the figure. So let's see what else I would talk about him. So he doesn't have like a strong color scheme. From the back, there's a bit of a red-green going on between the apron and the pants, and his skin's like a little reddish, but it's not very strong. And I kind of feel like the yellow on this stump is a more saturated color than anything on the figure, so this draws my eye more when I should be trying to draw people's eye to right here. This is not a huge thing. It's just something that I can probably easily fiddle with while I'm altering some stuff, so I thought I would mention it. So one way I could kind of emphasize the red-green color scheme is to add green in his skin. Like a khaki type green often looks really good in the shadows of skin. I'm actually going to do that on the other guy, so instead I'm going to work with purples. If I want to add shadows, I'm going to add purples throughout the figure. Let's see. So as I said, the face doesn't command a lot of attention, especially, it's better in person actually, but in the photograph, the eyes were really pale. Now his eyes are tiny and the bugbear's eyes are tiny, and I'm doing this on camera with non-optimal commissions. I may not get to doing detail work on the faces. I'll do it later and include it in the photo if that's the case, but just, I'm old and my eyes are only so good, and I still have to hold still and do a bunch of stuff that might be hard to do on camera. So I'm not going to make you a lot of promises about how we're fine. I'll make the faces, but I'll see what I can do. But I would like to try to draw more attention here, which also, if I bump up the highlights a little more, or may mean pushing the shadows a little more on his hair and beard, that will also help draw attention. So then the other thing that I thought was interesting when I started looking at this, so I actually, I think the apron is painted pretty well, but for fun, I thought, well, what does a real blacksmith's apron look like? And when I just did a general Google search, a lot came up that looked like this, but those were people selling brand new ones. So this is what a new blacksmith's apron looks like. So he's great haired and everything. This is not his first day on the job. So I looked up some blacksmiths, actually working blacksmiths, and I found out that the apron looks a lot different. And here's another fellow where his dings and wear are a bit different because it's a different color one. But I thought that was interesting and something that I could try to do. And it's also an example of something that's a good thing to do on, especially contest entries, but it's cool to do just on miniatures in general, and that is be specific. So instead of just leather, is it worn leather? Is it high quality leather of a noble where it's going to look all smooth and fine? Is it, something like this that's been put through a lot of wear and tear? The same thing with stone. So you're painting like a dungeon scene and there's stone, or you're painting a stone golem or something. Just doing a standard gray stone, dry brush and wash, that's not very exciting. If you paint marble, if you paint granite, that's specificity. That's making it more interesting, and it's also demonstrating more skill and attention. And both, granite in particular, you do that with like toothbrush flicks or some other things. They're not necessarily, these techniques I'm talking about, they're not necessarily, you have to be, a gold level painter who can paint tiny little eyes and do all these details and stuff. You can do it that way, but I'm going to try, and I don't typically stipple, but I'm going to try stippling to see if I can add some of this type of texture that I think is really cool to my blacksmith's apron. So I think that's everything that I wanted to talk about with him. So I will get painting. Did anyone have any, more? Oh, also contrast. I did write this down. Contrast, always, forever, the end. So there's definition of the muscles and the wrinkles of his pants, but I can bump all of that up and make it more interesting. You can always bump, there's contours of this tree that you can't really tell that it kind of dips in here before the root goes out here, stuff like that. I mean, I may not go nuts on the stump because that's not supposed to be the center of attention. I want to paint it so it looks like I paid attention to it and I finished it, but I don't want it to, draw the eye. And I already kind of feel like it's doing that because there's a lot of texture down here and I put a little bit of that saturated yellow in. So I might not go nuts, but I might actually just tone it down overall. But we'll see. And when I was looking at the aprons, since these guys were working, it also gave me an opportunity to look at the anvils. And there's like evidence of rust and a little more metal than I paint. We think of it as just that black. And I put a little bit of metal on it, I think. But that's something I can emphasize. And then when I looked at his tools, and I compare it to this guy's tool, it's blackened at the end because he's sticking it in the fire all the time. That's something I would waffle on actually doing because sometimes you get into this thing where you need to paint what people expect to see, sometimes more than what's really there. Like I painted a lily pad once, and I looked up lily pads online, and they don't all have those veins radiating out from the center. And I didn't feel, I actually had sculpted them myself, and I didn't feel like sculpting that in. So I didn't put that in, and it was a contest where people could comment on the entries. And like out of 20 comments, 16 of them were, why aren't there veins on the lily pad? So I would have to sit and think about, okay, are viewers versed enough in how blacksmithing works to know that the blackness there is because that's what the tool looks like after it's used? Or am I better off just leaving it metallic so that people know what it, people think what that is? Most of the time go with reality. But sometimes you have to think about stereotypes and stuff like that. I will bring this little gray back later. Oh, well, we're talking about contrast. Since I can't really do a before and after on the figures, I took before pictures and I'll put this up later. But I can't really do a before and after on the stream because you're going to, did that help? That helped. So this is an example of a figure that I painted to have more contrast after first painting it. So it originally looked like this, and then I repainted it with additional contrast here. I'm just going to leave the base off because I didn't really do much different to the base. So if you look at the hair, there's more darkness along the part. There's more darkness beside her face. You can see a big difference in the outfit. I really went a lot darker on the shadows, on the red, and then also bumped up the edge highlights because it's supposed to be like vinyl or, some futuristic shiny fabric. And even then, I think I could push this more. On the green, I think the wrinkles of her sleeves are a lot more apparent with the extra highlighting and extra shading. So this is an example of what we mean when we say more contrast. So I figure it's always easier to see when you're looking at the exact same figure, and that's one reason that I'm doing these repaints. This is an example. This is a little more specific to the OSL technique. But here, I didn't really change the highlights a lot between these two. What I did was add shadows, because what makes something look lighter is having other sections that look darker. So even though I had done all this freehand work on this scroll, I'm like, well, it's on the shadow side of the figure, so I just got to paint over a bunch of that and make it a lot darker. And then, make under the knee, you can see how much darker that is in these streaks because that's further away from the light. And just the creases in general. And even this is like This is a moderate version of OSL. You could get a lot more extreme than this. And I will say that about, I'll talk about this a little more later too, I think. But there's often this assumption that you have to paint a fancy or, special technique. You have to do NMM, you have to do OSL, you have to do freehand or something to do well in a contest. And really, consistency is also important. So doing a good job overall is as or more important than doing one part to a really high standard. Especially if you haven't, if the time is getting short and then you kind of phone in some other parts. A contest judged by painters who are, judges who are painters, we would rather see a consistent, good standard and something that's not flashy than you did this one flashy part well and the rest of the figure is just kind of there. So, and I did bring one of my figures. So there's a sheep that goes with this, but let me get my little gray thing back actually. But I didn't bring the sheep out of my case. So my contest entries in 2019 included this girl and her sheep familiar, and a third thing I don't remember, and then the Reapercon mouseling for that year. He was like a Dusk Warden mouseling, and he had some pretty nice non-metallic metal. I mean, his sword looked really cool. The judges picked this one to judge. So that's often the question we get most often is like, why did you pick that one to judge? Like, people will come in and they'll think this figure is the one that we'll like, and then we judge another one and they're like, why? I don't feel like I did anything special. And it's often it's that consistency thing. It's like you overall demonstrated a higher level of skill and competency and color choices. Just because something feels hard to do doesn't mean it's your best one, I guess is another way to look at that. Sometimes when something when it's not a struggle, it's because you're using skills that you're good at. And so you succeed without it feeling like torture because you're demonstrating your mastery of the skills that you're using to do that thing. All right, so I'll come out a little so that hopefully we can see the figure and I'm going to be probably using a lot of colors, so I can't guarantee that the palette's going to stay in view all the time. Now what I'm going to do is, so one of the things I wanted to talk to you guys about was not to be afraid if you don't remember the colors you use. So these are mostly the colors I swatched last week, the stuff in the swag boxes, and then also the colors from 2019 since that was pirate themed. And I think I have a couple of the Kickstarter colors in here, but they're all colors, or almost all are colors that have come out since I painted these figures, which was years ago. So I can guarantee to you that these are not the colors I used because they're new. I did not get a chance to shake them beforehand as I usually do because I was having technical problems. So I think I'm going to work on the skin a little first and then maybe tackle that apron and then look at some shadows and stuff. Well, the skin and maybe the hair. So hopefully I'm going to put my magnifier on for some of this. So I'll try to keep checking chat and yell at me if it's going out of view all the time. So I have no idea what skin I used for that. So I did pull a few skin tones out. I could mix some, but I'm not typically, I'm going to take off the noisy ring since I'm going to shake so much more paint than usual. So that I picked out for the bugbear. So I just picked out gnome flesh and tawny flesh. I don't know if these have, some of the skin tones in the bone set have different names now, which I think was a good idea, but I do not necessarily remember what those names are. And I'll also, so one of the colors I picked up that's not new, I mean, it's new since I painted those figures, but it's not super new, is yellow mold, which is one of my favorite colors for adding for highlights. Most of the time I would rather not use pure white. Something with a little yellow in it makes warm highlights, and I often do cool shadows, and that's a nice effect. Plus I am planning to do purple in the shadows, so this will give a little color contrast. between the shadows and highlights. So when we talk about contrast, we most often talk about what I was saying a minute ago, where the crevices aren't as dark as they could be, and the peaks aren't as light as they could be. And that's a very important kind of contrast for miniature painting, but it is not the only one. So if you go to my blog, if you just go to the homepage, so just birdwithbrush.com, look for something called the contrast series. And one of the things there is the contrast catalog. And that's kind of, here's all the different kinds of contrast you can use on a figure. And then there's a whole bunch of other articles about the highlights and shadows type contrast. So speaking of, I do need shadows. So let's see. So if I want to emphasize the red, I could use kind of a reddish brown, or I could use something that's like a darker skin tone. I didn't pick out a darker skin tone, but I think I like this one. So this is one that Kickstarter colors. Where's that brown? Now typically when I paint, I actually mix up all my highlights and shadows beforehand, but I'm going to try to be a little more freeform today. I'm also going to use my nice brushes most of the time, because I really do paint with my nice brushes most of the time. I don't do a lot of blending with a synthetic. It's who I am. My brush of choice is typically Winsor & Newton Series 7, and then for like super detailed stuff, the Series 7 miniature. But the Reaper brushes are good too, and I think they're putting some of these in, I want to say the hobby box, which is cool. So if you haven't tried sable brushes before and you're getting the hobby box, I urge you to go ahead and try them. All right, the lighting is not ideal. Let's see, I'll try that. So I'm just going to try to, punch up his skin a little. I think I'll work on the highlights and maybe the shadows a little. Because I think that's one reason that the skin kind of, the skin and the face kind of aren't standing out, because they don't really have punchy highlights. So when I was telling you to not be afraid to paint over stuff, the key thing is your values. So I don't have my nice value scale, but I have this. This is actually white paint. You can barely see it because the card is white. So this is a 6-point value scale, from white at the lightest to black at the darkest. So I'm saying like the highlights are around here, and I want them more around here. And the shadows are around here, and maybe I want them more around here. It looks like I did highlight his face a fair bit originally, but it went kind of chalky. This area is very small. This is not going to be an ideal figure for showing off your face painting skills. But if you just, one of the reasons I pick these figures is because it's absolutely a-okay to just pull figures off your game table and bring the Reapercon. We don't expect everyone who enters to be trying to be, a top shelf display painter. That's not the only way to paint, and that's not the only type of painting that we want to see. So I thought that I should grab some figures that kind of fit that description a little more. But if you did want to grab some of your better game figures and then touch them up a little before you got there, that is cool too. So I actually, I like to pay attention to faces, but I also kind of like to pay attention to hands, because hands usually show us what a person is doing. So I'll try to, get a little highlight going on like the knuckles here, or maybe here. You see how my knuckles look white? That's partly because of the light, but it's also because you're seeing the white cartilage and bone under my skin. So on knees, elbows, and knuckles, I will sometimes emphasize those a little, because there's two things happening: the effect of the light and the effect of seeing the bone through our skin, which is slightly translucent. So he's pretty jacked for his age, so I definitely want to make sure we see his muscles. I didn't do anything with the... So this is the layering technique, which is what I typically use. I'll sometimes rough in with wet blending, but since these are, you know, finished figures that I'm touching up, I'm not trying to establish blends. I'm just trying to tweak them. So I'm not likely to do any wet blending on these. So now I'll use this slightly lighter one. And even though it's like 1000% humidity, it feels like my paint is drying out. If you do get nice brushes and you're concerned about making them last as long as possible, maybe don't mix paint with them. It's not dire if you don't get the paint up here. I do have a mixing brush, but for the sake of expediency, I'm just gonna do some mixing with my nice brush. So, let's see, so that's in view. His anvil stump, yeah, I guess this would be challenging for him to... I had to laugh a little that the picture I found online, the guy like had a stump and all. It was like, okay. I think it was from, I forget the name of the place, but it was a recreation, one of those houses where you can go and see how people lived in olden times. So probably in olden times they really did use stumps, so he went ahead and did that. So already you can see that I'm getting a little more contrast. The blend's maybe not perfect. If I have problems with that, I can come back with that slightly darker color and just try to come around the edges and blend it in a little more. There you go. There's a story reason. There's always a story reason. So Valander said that he's using his great uncle's anvil, and his great uncle is a Goliath and is 7 feet 8 inches tall. Let me do a little bit on the back. I don't want to make his spine look too inset. I think that can get creepy. I think he eats well and everything. Then I'll just see if I can get the face up a little more. This may end up being more a question of adding some shadow than highlight. And it's tough because he really just has such a small section of skin on his face. All right, so normally I do shadows first, so I don't know why I went this way, but it's a good demonstration that you can do it in either direction. I'm not thinning my paint a lot because I don't anymore, but I did used to thin my paint a lot more and do more layers to make it smooth. So by no means am I saying this is the only way to layer. Now the downs, I know I picked the brownie one, but I kind of want to, since there's red in the apron and there's red in the skin, part of the problem I think he has is that his arms don't stand out enough from the apron. So hopefully adding the highlighting is going to help with that. I think there's already plenty of definition between his fingers, so I'm not going to mess with that. You'll notice I'm pulling the shadows towards the areas I want to look darker, and that helps with the, you know, not getting transition lines too. I definitely want to increase the shadows there. I'm not going to put it in his spine because, like I said, I think it's already approaching creepy level. I'm just going to thin down a bit of this brown oxide Kickstarter color that I'm sure will eventually come to people everywhere. And I think that's the one that's like sort of a mini painter's equivalent of burnt umber. And then the red oxide is like burnt sienna, and the yellow oxide is like yellow ochre. And those are very handy colors for the kinds of things I'm doing right here, which is adding, hey David, adding a little contrast or a little more saturation. So I'm going to try adding some shadows to the face and hope that that makes it a little more interesting. He does have this really great kind of eagle beak nose that I enjoy a lot. So hopefully it's staying in focus. So one of the things that would make him a challenging figure to do as a contest entry is the eyes are just so small and inset that even with my nice brushes magnification, there's going to be only so much I can do there. But they would look, I mean, if you saw him live, they would look shadowed and stuff. So that's fine in terms of being a figure, but in terms of making a cool expression that people are going to notice, that's a bit of a different problem. I think I could go even a little deeper on the skin. Let's see what is in my bag of goodies. I'm just going to mix in a little bit of black indigo. Often I would use blue liner for this. This looks like it's going to be a new favorite shadow color for me. I think it's been out before and I just didn't pay attention to it. So I'm going to go just a little darker on the skin. Because like I said, I'm trying to go from, you know, if the shadows are here, I want to be more here. For my deepest shadows. So those are just going to go only, you know, in the darkest crevices. I'm not going to cover over everything I just painted. And that looked a little stark, so we just get some of my other one. Wiping it with your finger is totally a legit move. I have a little, I don't use it as much. Do I have it with me? But I have a brush that I made when I was first starting to paint. I don't think I have it with me. But it was basically just like a brush like this or flat, and I just cut it off so there's, you know, it was just a few millimeters above the ferrule. And it's a scrub brush. So if I make a mistake and I notice it, well, the paint isn't fully, you know, if it's only been a few minutes, I can probably get it off. And that has been very handy on occasion. You can buy scrubber brushes, but the ones that I've seen are meant for watercolor and they're like too harsh. They would go down to your base surface, I think. So you just want a good synthetic flat and cut it up. Okay, so hopefully the skin's looking a little better. And now what can we work on? I'm not going to go nuts on the pants, but I'll do a little bit on the pants. So I have this Grave Gloom and Goggler Green. So these aren't the same colors that were on his pants, but if I mostly stick to the shadows and I mostly stick to the highlights, it should work. And that's why doing touch-ups is not as scary as it might seem on the surface. And especially if you start with figures like this that are just, you know, gaming figures or figures you painted years ago that you are no longer emotionally attached to, those are great to practice on. Because, you know, if you do get it wrong, you're not going to be devastated. So this I'm going to try to, you know, I don't want it to be as shiny as the futuristic girl that I showed you in the photograph, because, you know, these are just simple cloth. Maybe they're leather pants too. I guess if I worked as a blacksmith, I might want leather pants for protection. But they're not like shiny, futuristic space cloth. So I'm not going to be trying to paint this to like a high level of contrast. Just bump it up a little so it looks a little more interesting from the back view. So that took me ages to do that little touch up, which is why I'm encouraging you to do this. If you have a contrast entry that you've been working on, let it sit for a couple of weeks and then come back and see if there's anything like this that you need to do. Because you usually can't tell right after you painted it. I think I need just a little of that. I don't want to jump in too light. So this value matching thing where I'm trying to start with the color that was already there and then work up a little, it can be hard to do. So when I say this is a value scale, okay, that's easy in black, gray, and white, but then I've got green and then I've got skin color, and it can be a little tougher, and that first bit of paint you put down might be wrong and you might need to scrub it off and then try again. But the more you practice that skill, the better at it you'll get. I did a oil painting workshop this weekend. I was almost going to put the painting in the background to talk about it a little because it was a good experience. Well, it was frustrating. I wasn't that happy with what I did. And that happens. Maybe I just wasn't in the right frame of mind. I don't know. But one of the things that we had to do as part of that was the value matching, where we worked on something one day and then we come back the next day and you got to get something that's a similar value or slightly lighter and put it over. And even the instructor, who is like this like amazing painter, would get it wrong, and he'd have to go back to his palette and adjust it and then put another little bit of paint on. But the more you do it, the better you get at it. Some people are just, I bet Anne, if you watch Anne's show, she's probably awesome at this because she works with color a lot and she has a lot of experience doing it. And I think she had an eye for color even before she started doing the paint stuff. Hey, Raiders, hi. Oh my, 149, wow. Hello, many, many Raiders. Today what I'm doing is I have some older figures that I'm giving people an example of what it looks like, hi Rawl, when you touch them up and try to paint them and improve them. So I originally, before I started working on the figure, I gave a critique of it as if it was an entry in the MSP Open at ReaperCon, and now I'm just trying to touch it up to fix some of the things that I mentioned in the critique. So right now I'm working on increasing the contrast on his pants. I already worked on the skin some, and I'm going to have pictures. So I have before pictures. I'm going to put that up on my blog. You can see it over there in a few days, within a week or so. I might wait till the video stream gets uploaded to YouTube so that I can link to it for people who want to watch the video too. So I'm trying to up the contrast on the pants a little, but not go crazy because he's not wearing like shiny patent leather pants because he's a blacksmith and that's not his deal. Okay, so I think that looks better. And I'm putting him further away because that's part of the trick with contrast. You want something that attracts attention and where you can figure out what the parts of the figure are from a distance. Because if you're at the MSP Open, we are walking down a row of tables looking at the figures. And you want people walking down the rows to see your figure and want to look at it closer. And it's the same thing for an online contest. You want someone to see the thumbnail and want to click it to look closer. All right, so that's the skin and the pants. I think before I do the black leather or anything else like that, I'm going to work on this tree stump a little because I'm likely to get some paint on other things and then I can touch them up at the same time. So what do I want to do with the tree stump? I kind of want to dull it down. The texture is nice, and we're going to add some more texture to the apron and a little more highlighting on his hair that makes him more interesting. Maybe I should do the hair first. Let's do the hair first. All right, so I probably used Dusky Skin for this, which has now been canceled, but that's okay because one of the Reaper colors is Drow Skin that looks like it might be even cooler. And then, of course, there's true white in his hair. And if I need to go even a little darker than that, I'll probably just use the, yeah, I'll just use a little bit of the whatever color that was. Let's see, it wasn't that one. It was Black Indigo, which is a Kickstarter color, I think. So I'm trying to use colors that are new so that I'm definitely not using colors that I used on these figures before because I painted them years before these colors came out. So I want you to feel like you can go, you don't have to remember the exact colors that you used to paint a figure to try doing this. The important thing is matching the value of how light or dark areas are and then adjusting it accordingly. So I'm thinning these a little more. Things with white in them tend to be a bit more opaque. So, you know, I had to thin the highlights on the skin a little more, then I had to thin the shadows. And then greens are a little more transparent, so I didn't have to thin those as much. And that's why it's good to do, if you watched last week's show, we talked about swatches. And look, I did it. So we talked about, couldn't you just do it on the bottle? And I'm like, you know what? Why don't I? So I've been, as I use paints, I'm going to be adding the swatches on the bottle. And I may still do some other ways too, but that, since that's so easy to do while I'm working. Okay, I don't know if you guys can hear my neighbor yelling at her dog, but if you can, I apologize. She yells at her dog a lot. I mean, sometimes it's nice things, but actually she has like 4 dogs, but she only talks to 2 of them. Like, I only know 2 of these dogs' names, even though I see 4 dogs over there. So I guess 2 of them are naughtier than the other 2. I don't know. So I'm going to use the side of my brush a bit here because I want to try to not go into the crevices. So I call this side brushing sometimes. All right, I actually think I want to do a little more shading and see where that gets us. So add a little bit of definition around the mustache area so that you can tell kind of like which part is the mustache and which part is the beard, because that should make his face a little more interesting to look at. And then where it's starting to curve under his chin, make that a little darker. I did, before Reaper started doing like the streams and stuff, so they had the studio and we made some videos, but they weren't doing a lot of streams and things. I did a video on painting hair. So I think it's under the Reaper Toolbox playlist on Reaper's website, or if you go to my website and look at the kind of table of contents thing, there is a thing about how to paint hair, and it links to the video and has reference photos that go with the video. So hopefully I'm keeping things in view. But yeah, now I just want to get some pure white on there. Maybe I even thinned it too much because we're doing highlights. We want them to pop. So I am trying to check chat, so just let me know if you have any questions about something I'm doing. So yeah, that pops a little better. And if I have to, I can, you know, try to blend it in with that other color. But if you look at, you know, shiny hair, it does have these high reflective little spots. So it's good to try to capture that. And that's one of those things that I exaggerate a little bit in miniature painting. So here's a piece of advice that I've been trying to give to people, particularly for the MSP Open, but even just in general. if you've been coming to ReaperCon for a while and getting feedback on your work, you've probably been told it needs more contrast, or if you did an effect like OSL or something and it was like, well, I couldn't really tell what was happening, push it more. And you may be getting the same kinds of feedback online. It doesn't, it's not that the feedback at ReaperCon is necessarily massively different than what you're going to get somewhere else. So you go home and you try to do something like this, or you paint your next guy and you try to bump it up. And then you try to, you come back and you get told it needs more contrast. Maybe it's better, but it still needs more contrast. And then you go home and you try again. And then, so this cycle can go on for a few years. So here's my suggestion. Go to the other extreme. Don't try to incrementally, push your contrast up. Go to crazy town. Paint something that you feel like it's insanely contrasted. And you can bring multiple things to the ReaperCon MSP Open. So bring your insanely contrasted figure and then your like regular ones that you think are a reasonable amount of contrasting. You were just trying to push it a little. See which one people like. See which ones the judges pick for assessing. Ask your friends which they like better. So just go big. Just push it. Like paint OSL so that someone's going to need sunglasses to look at your figure. And you still probably won't be crazy, but you might start getting there a lot faster than I'm going to make it a little more contrasted. I'm going to make it a little more contrasted. That is my new piece of advice that if I could go back in time and tell myself, because I 100% did that, well, I think it's better, and then it's just a little better thing. All right, so I think that helped. Oh yeah, when I'm looking at it on screen, I feel like that helped his face pop a lot more. There we go. Smaller Sam says, when I was a music major, they always told us to overdo the dynamics, be overly soft or overly loud. It's the same type of principle. And it's because when you know something, like even if I just spent an hour painting this guy, I've looked at him for an hour. None of your viewers are going to look at him for an hour. Like even if he's the most gorgeous miniature they've ever seen in their lives. There's hundreds of other miniatures to look at and other things to do. So something that you're familiar with, you see all the little nooks and crannies and you feel like there's a lot of contrast and you're looking at it with the magnifier and all your lights on. Try taking your miniature to your dining room. Dining rooms usually have pretty indifferent light, and see if it still looks exaggerated. All right. So I wanted to do that before I worked on the tree because maybe that's enough. And I feel like there is a lot more texture now. So I might dull this down a little, but I'm not going to go nuts on the tree. Or maybe I shouldn't even touch the tree because we only have so much time in our lives. I may not get to if I don't get to the bugbear today, I will do another version of this show. I'm going to keep doing stuff like this, talking about things related to painting contest entries or just trying to improve your painting over the next little while because we are ramping up to ReaperCon and also other conventions are coming back and other contests. I do think that the boots and the bracer are not quite contrasted enough, but I think it's probably going to be more interesting for you guys if I get to the apron and trying where I may spectacularly fail. So for those who came in a little later, when I was doing the critique portion, one thing I noticed about this guy is his apron looks like it's brand new. Like if you go do a Google search for blacksmith apron, you'll see about 20 that look just like this. So I'm like, what does a working blacksmith's apron look like? So I found this fellow and this fellow. And I do want to point out that these are pictures that are, at least they said, this is from Wikipedia and it's Creative Commons. And this one said that it was free to use photos. So I try to be good when I do things online and not steal other people's work, because I've had people use my photographs and stuff and I didn't love it. So I want to respect other creative people. All right, so actually I'm going to put that picture over here so that I can reference it while I paint. Now, one way to paint that would be to get my little tiny brush and just do a lot of, you've probably seen Michael Proctor working like that, where you're just trying to do a lot of little lines and dashes and stuff like that. And that is how I painted this girl's leather. And then I glazed over it a bunch because it was like too much texture. But what I thought would be fun is I've never done stippling before. So, and one of the themes of the show is experimentation and me being willing to take the hits so you guys can learn things and maybe feel more comfortable about experimenting yourselves. So I have this stipple brush. There was a Kickstarter for some brushes, and I got this, and I've like literally never used it. So the point, it's kind of like when I was talking about how I have a scrub brush to rub off mistakes. So it's a little bit of a stiffer bristle, and the idea is that instead of making the nice point, the bristles splay so that they'll make little dots. And then this is something I found at the art store. So it's a Princeton Select. They call it a round blender. I don't, maybe it's for all paint or something. I don't know what kind of paint you're supposed to be blending with this, but it's a little bit pointed, but I think that actually means that I'll be able to get a finer, even though it looks like a bigger brush, I'll be able to aim it better. Because in an ideal world, I would have done this messy step before I painted the anvil and the stump and the tool. But we're in a touch-up world, so that's not where we are. So now I have to figure out colors that are kind of like this. So I think this rusted anchor kind of looks like the highlight color of his apron. That brown oxide kind of looks like the shadow color. But I think maybe I want to, I had a red oxide. What did I do with it? I feel like I kind of want to emphasize the red a little more. And I may be out of luck because I don't know what I did with that ball of paint. That's not creative of me. My apology. There's it is. Well, it might be too orangey. So I will use this oxide brown and then just mix in some chum red and make it redder. Or maybe I'll even do the red on its own. Oops. Shake your paints more than you're seeing me do. I don't want you guys to have to watch me shake paint all day. All right, and then, so this is kind of like an orangey, rusty color. And then down there, it's a little more tan. I don't want to go into skin colors too much, which, I mean, skin colors often work to highlight leather because he's got skin colors, so I don't want to compete with his skin too much. So I may push the orangey factor by using some of this oxide yellow with the red. That doesn't look very well mixed. And this is why you should mix your paints more than you're seeing me do here. All right. Normally I mix them before the show, but I had technical problems, so that did not happen. So in this case, I don't want to blend. I want the marks to show. So there's going to be some of the darker parts are going to be a little smoother. I'll put those in after, but I want to start getting some highlights that have some texture in them. I do want to dull it down just a little, I think. So I'm also going to experiment with not really thinning those at all because I think that will help the stippling. So let's try the big stippling brush first. And I'm going to assume this is kind of like dry brushing where you don't want a lot of water on your brush. So off screen, I'm just going to be wiping off some of the excess paint on here because I want it to kind of make little dots instead of, oh yeah, that's pretty good. Oh, the one thing I didn't do is I pointed out that there was a streak of silver metallic on his outfit. So I just kind of want to cover that over because there's no real logical reason why that would be there. And I will want to stipple over that. Okay. So I'll try this. Then you could get you would want a brush that's fairly stiff and you can just cut it off and make your own stipple brush. You don't have to buy one or anything. I just happen to have one that I had already bought that I'm like, well, why don't I give it a try? gonna switch over to the one with the pointier head. Because I think if I hadn't already painted stuff, I think that the other one would work pretty well. But I do want to try to avoid going over. And here's an example of what I mean about go big. I don't feel like that's very noticeable. I think I'm going to have to go up to a lighter color. But if this is, this being the first time I've done this, or I'm, not confident with doing a lot of contrast, that's going to feel scary. That's going to be something that you might have to push yourself to do. I feel like this apron would definitely, be getting lots of sparks. And so on from and I lied, and I am going to use some skin color. So if I were painting this as a contest entry, and I was like, okay, I've never painted a worn out blacksmith apron before, or leather that had that kind of wear and tear, I might get, a figure like this cheap bones guy, and practice it before I did it on my fancy contest entry. So that's not only okay, I would say it's kind of encouraged to do that sort of thing. So I decided to just take a leap and see, that might be too much, but we could glaze it later. So maybe I'll just leave it like that, because I want to live the courage of my convictions when I'm telling you guys to push it. I can come back over with the darker color is another way to handle that, and then it'll add a little color to it. So I think that looks a lot more interesting, even though the other way was kind of like nice blending and it might have been prettier or something. This looks more interesting, to me at least. So I want to just glaze a little. Actually, no, I'll use that rusted anchor. No, that was rusted anchor. I don't know. See, it doesn't matter what color it is. When stippling, do you want the paint on the brush kind of dry like you would dry brush? That is what I figured would work better, and it did seem to work well. I have found that if I were doing it the hard way, where I'm painting a lot of little dots and dashes, I would keep the paint fairly opaque as well, because it's the opposite of blending. You want to see that stroke and mark standing out from the underlying surface. So if you have your paint a little thicker and more opaque, that's going to work better. You also will find that kind of thing easier to do with paints that are a little more opaque. So every now and then I've tried to do texture things, and the paint color I chose was pretty transparent, and it made it a lot tougher. So if I think it's just too much some places, I can kind of tone it down a little and add a bit of color by going. So I could do a full glaze where I'm glazing over everything, but I want to keep some of those marks more apparent, so I'm just going to do it that way. And then I'm going to get just a little, I don't want to go too light. I want to make sure that the top of the apron or the pocket is pretty well highlighted just from the stippling, but I just want to add a little more, and then add a little more where the edges of the apron are. So here I'm using like the tip of the brush and putting it up against the where the sculpt pokes out, the line of the sculpt here. You can probably see it best here. So it's like a cross. My brush is going against this edge. And as long as I keep the tip far enough away that I don't get any red on the pants, this is a nice, easy way. Edging, people call this edging, I think. So I just want to add more of that because it helps define the apron as a distinct surface away from the other things. And then the back wouldn't have the exposure to the sparks and whatnot that create that stippling, but I can still, bump up some of the highlights and maybe add a little more shadow to the straps. the back. And then the other thing I want to do is make a nice dark line between the apron and the pants. So one of the number one things that we as judges end up talking to people about, especially in the certificate silver or bronze range, is adding more definition, making parts of the miniature separate from other parts of the miniature. And one of the best ways to do that is dark lining. So you don't have to use black. In this case, I have the black indigo. I think this Kraken ink would actually be, in fact, I'm going to use the Kraken ink because I want to put some purple on him later. So you just need like a nice dark color. Blue liner is like my absolute favorite for this. I think it's even darker than black in some ways because blue recedes. Blue's a cool color and it recedes from our vision. So if you look right here, I mean, there's a bit of a line and there's different colors between the apron and the pants, but that there would be a shadow there because the apron is over the pants. The light, you know, the edge of the apron would cast a little line of shadow here. So while this may seem cartoony, it does reflect something that happens in real life. Like if you have your sleeve, it overhangs your arm, it makes a little shadow. So you can see that on this side, there's a lot more definition between his pants and the edge of the apron than there is on this side. Now, lining is tough. I'm not going to lie to you. It's a great way to build your brush control. And one of the ways I do it to make it a little easier is, so say I painted these pants, and I would have finished the apron because that's way inset, but, or the back of the apron at least. So I paint the pants, I put the green on, you know, which is my middle green, do the lining around the edges of the apron. And then if I mess up and I get some over here, I've just got my base coat and I put a little, you know, I just touch that up or I clean up the edge and then I keep going. So I was just doing a little bit around where the boots meet and then this inside leg. And in fact, I want that apron to fall back in space more. I want to make it a little darker and cooler. So I don't want to use this full strength because then I'd essentially be painting it purple. So I'm going to thin it down a little and just add a shadow over it. And that will make his legs look more three-dimensional and like they're coming towards you because the apron is pushing back. So yeah, that stippling technique looks like it's going to be a pretty good one if you're painting tabletop miniatures. That was pretty fast. So that's a way to highlight like your monster type characters that wouldn't take care of their leather and whatnot, as well as somebody who's got a work-worn look. Clavicus, I like brown liner. I just like blue liner more. All right. So, oh, you know what? I don't feel like I added enough shadow to where... So this is what I mean about definition. I'm maybe not going to do full lining here, but I want to make it a little darker where his hair meets his body because the hair would be casting a shadow. It's going to look more three-dimensional, and it's also going to stand out better on the tabletop to see, you know, for people to see from a distance. You were right, Clavicus, to each his own. There's a lot of personal preferences in paint colors and what works for people. And so it's great to get some suggestions from, you know, people like me or Michael Proctor, whoever, about some cool paint colors to try. But you may find that you just absolutely love a different color that none of us ever mentioned. And that is a-okay. If it helps you paint, that's the goal. See, that was a mistake. That was too much contrast. And now the mistake is gone. Okay. So I could add a little bit of rust or something to the anvil. In the picture, This one, I mean, they kind of look like you could stipple it, but I feel like I want it to be a little more deliberately placed. So I could also use just a janky old brush like this, maybe. If I cut this off. I have a whole bunch of these because my friend used to run one of those like painting with a twist type things. It wasn't that one, but it was something like that. And they would buy these like sets of brushes where they got like 6 brushes of different sizes, and they never used this one. So she was able to give me a whole bunch of them for paint and take. But eventually they wear out and then they become my mixing brushes. All right, so this is kind of like a makeup brush. It's very soft. So it may be a little too soft for this, but we're going to see. Take some of that rusted anchor. And again, I am going to use this not thinned out, and I'm going to kind of use a drier brush and scrub some of the paint off. And then just sort of jab it on. And then I will get the metallic and put it around the edges again. It's a very scientific test for the dry brushing. I'm not necessarily saying you should paint on yourself, but I do like testing. Get it on the top. It's going to be hard to get it on that side, but the good news for me is that viewers aren't likely to look there much anyway. So now I think I want to mix that with some of the oxide yellow and get an oranger. I don't really have like a good orangey orange, do I? Let's try this. Okay, definitely didn't shake that one up. Yeah, I think that's a rustier color. I'll go with that. Shadow Raven says painting competitions would be so boring if everyone painted exactly the same with the same tools and techniques. And I 100% agree. I sometimes hear comments that, you know, only certain kinds of painting seem to get rewarded. And I find that baffling because if you look at my painting versus Michael Proctor, for example, we paint massively differently. I mean, he's like this creative explosion of color, and I'm like meticulously being insane, and he's got like these fantastic scenes, and I tend to do like a single person just standing there. Like I just, you know, I can't see how you can argue that the MSP Open only rewards smooth blending given some of the entries I've seen. And then when I went to one of those military shows, there was a guy who painted his figures with toothpicks. And they looked amazing. I mean, it sounded crazy, and I bet it's not fun. But I'm like, he did all right in the show because the figures looked amazing. Pendrake TG, are you wondering what the figure is? And then just for the benefit of people who came in a little later and may also be wondering that, this is Blacksmith by Bobby Jackson. It's available in Bones as a single figure, and this is the Bones one. 77142, but it's also available in metal as a pack of 3 with 2 other townsfolk type characters in pack 2584. I just want to see if I can get a bit orangier of a rust. And then call that finished. And I feel like I'm overdoing the rust a little compared to the reference picture, but that might go back to the you have to exaggerate on a miniature and go a little bigger. So I think I'm going to be okay with that. But what I am going to do is instead of having rust on the edges where it's a tool that's getting used and it's getting wear and tear, I'm going to put metallic on the edges. So let's see. I have the metallics. There are metallics in the ReaperCon box set, but they are somewhat unusual colors, so I needed just plain steel or whatever. Thank you, Quindy. You're pretty amazing because I didn't tell her in advance, like, it occurred to me like an hour ago, like, oh, I bet people are going to wonder what these figures are. Maybe I should write that down. So your very helpful moderators are here. All right, so I'm going to do that edging thing again, because if I look at my reference picture, it's kind of like the corners and the edges that seem to be showing more of the metal. This one, I even could maybe dry brush some of the metal, but I kind of like the idea of keeping the anvil fairly dark. So I think I just want to stick to the edges. So I didn't thin that down, and I'm going to do that technique where I'm going from the side again. And I might not do like the whole line, since, you know, the way the tool gets used isn't necessarily going to be, you know, totally even wear and tear. But I'm going to emphasize some of the corners, because it seems like that would probably get more contact. We had a Smith in chat. Maybe he can tell us where an anvil would get the most wear and tear. I mean, a little careful from the back since stuff is already painted. So hopefully most of you are already using like a holder or something to paint your miniatures on, because you probably noticed that I'm moving this all around, and that's one of the advantages of using a holder, is that this hand is kind of always making the same motion. That's one of the ways you increase your brush control, is instead of trying to do this, if I keep this hand kind of making the same motion as much as possible, that's kind of like how an athlete makes the same move over and over again, and you start building up muscle memory and get better at that particular move. So I kind of want to get just a little bit on that edge down there. I think that anvil looks way cooler now. So the Shadow Raven is our representative blacksmith, and he says, so it wears pretty evenly across the face and a bit around the horn. This one doesn't have a heel. So I'm going to assume this is the horn and this is the face. But you can correct me if I'm wrong. So that kind of sounds like I should even add a little more on the top where it's getting hit with the hammer all the time. That would make sense. So I'm just going to kind of just brush across. And a little bit here. So I was talking about that idea of specificity. So it looks more like a real person doing a real thing now, because we were specific instead of just painting generic leather and generic black iron. I have an example of another miniature from long ago that I painted, which is this guy. And I looked up old copper cannons, and they really look like that, where it was kind of like teal blue, and then you could see some, you know, from the corrosion, and then you could see some of the copper. So this actually made it easier to paint, because, you know, I basically just painted that blue color and did a little bit of shading, and then, you know, brushed on some copper color. But now you can also see where maybe you do more research and you don't get things wrong, because those of you who know anything about cannons are probably looking at this going, no. So my excuse is that he's a skeleton, but in reality it's just that I put the miniature together wrong, and the cannon should be pointed the other way. But there you go. All right, so I'm going to talk about the base just a little bit. So yes, Grey Wolf, it is. It is mounted backwards on the carrot. Shadow Raven said the heel would be the cantilevered part on the back if it were that kind of anvil, which this guy doesn't have it, but I can't remember if the other Reaper blacksmiths have some of that. And Grey Wolf points out that a smith wouldn't let his anvil rest for very long without cleaning and oiling it. And that is probably true, but I like the visual look of exaggerating it a little. And my real people, my real examples had some rust. It's subtle, so I'm bumping it up, but there's definitely, some orange and brown on these. So for the sake of making a miniature that people can perceive that, I'm exaggerating it a little, which is what I recommend that you do. So this would be, if you entered this in the ReaperCon Open, this would go in the painter category. And like basing and construction and general presentation are around 50% or 15% of your score. So we don't really, you don't get a lot of bonus points for having a super fancy base, and we don't really dock you for having a very simple base. So this would be fine in the MSP Open. The fact that I just stuck him to this black base and the base is fully painted, and we can consider the black base to be like a frame. This is the base for him. I'm not saying you shouldn't add to the basing, because you can kind of improve your presentation thing. If I filled this in with just some texture paste or something like that and painted it the same as the ground, that would look a little nicer. But for painter category, that's not really a big deal. So let's see. Is there anything else I would address on this guy? I would probably... Well, I think we'll just be working on this guy, and then I'll get to our bugbear buddy. I may do the critique on him at least, and then maybe work on the repainting later. I don't know. But I do want to do more shows like this. So, wood grain on the stump top. Yeah, it didn't really have any texture, so that could be painted in. It is a pretty small area, so it's not vital. I'm not going to blacken the tong tips, even though I think that is what it would look like. I might add some highlight to the metallics, because they should look a lot shinier and newer and nicer, or they're a different kind of metal than the anvil. So I would want them to stand, that hammerhead to stand out a little more from the anvil. The black definitely needs more highlighting, and actually it needs some repair, because that's where the scratches are. And the scratches are, so I don't prime my bones. The scratches are not because I didn't prime them. The scratches are because the foam in my figure case kind of grabs a little bit sometimes. So my experience is that the thing most likely to damage bones is storage related. Because they're so light, they're not going to get a lot of damage in play. Like, even, I don't mind doing this at all. I have zero problem doing that. But getting, abraded, or if you have them all in a baggie together, and ask me how I know this, because a friend of mine really did store all her things in a baggie together. And one of them was like, there's a bed, I think, and the bed had sharp corners, and it was just gouging all the other things. So I need my tree black for that. I hadn't used black yet. I probably used solid black the first time I painted him, because I love solid black, but I've started to like dragon black a lot too, so I pulled that one out, and I know that I hadn't used it on originally because it probably wasn't out, or I didn't know how cool it was. I'll just fix the chips with straight black. Pendrick says, I learned yesterday that otters think that lemon smells foul. Well, my cat doesn't love it either. So I think animals can smell a lot better than we can, and they just find the smell of that kind of thing a lot more. All right, so for the hair, I used the drow skin as the shadow, and that's something I like, this kind of color, not quite purple, not quite gray. I like a lot for shadows on white, but I also like it a lot for highlights on black, and that will help unify them. If I use the same colors in different areas, that's going to make for a more harmonious figure something that looks like it's under the same lighting than if I just grab all kinds of different colors. Sorry, my brushes are getting a little messy over here. I'm just gonna put the stipple brushes back over here now that I'm done with them. So this is a lot lighter than black, so I'm gonna need like a little bit of a transition. And honestly, painting black really super smooth is challenging. I'm not going to lie to you. But this is leather, so it doesn't have to be really super smooth. It can be kind of, you know, dinged up a little and stuff. Since he's a working man. And I'm going to try to use the same principles. So partly I want to highlight where the light would be, but I also am thinking about, well, if you were really wearing these boots, where would they get more wear and tear? So the tips of the toes, absolutely. Probably on the heels a little bit, where these cuffs flare out. At the edges of the cuffs where you're pulling them on and off. If I were being very diligent, I could go look at real boots and try to find out. So I think the color I used just now was pretty similar to the top highlight I already had on the boots, so it didn't do a lot. So now we're getting a lot lighter. I like to try to define that area between the sole of the shoe and the top of the shoe when that's been sculpted nicely for us. I think that. Sometimes I'll even paint the heel part a different color than the top part if I'm being very fancy. So I feel like this needs to get just a little bit lighter. Well, let's just go ahead and use the yellowy one. I might use like a more gray one, but I think this will work. But because this new color has more white in it, I am going to thin the paint a little more. And now it has yellow in it, so we'll see what this makes. Okay. So I'm really just kind of dotting places because I don't mind if it looks sort of worn. And this is much more opaque, so if I were being very persnickety, I would come back in with my other color and work some of this in. Well, and honestly, that when I'm painting nice miniatures for Reaper Store and stuff, that is most of my life, is being persnickety and going back in. But I'll just give you a brief example of that. So I'm kind of trying to hit the edges where the lighter thing is to blend it with the less lighter thing. Okay, now I want to have fun with the purple. So I had turned this around because I had silver metallic and I was going to work with gray paint. And I had a psychic feeling I would mess that up. So I'm turning it back around because I have more of a space right here. Let's see. So often I like to use a color called Imperial Purple for this. Did I bring it? So this is Imperial Purple. I haven't done a little sample thing. But I promised that I would use new colors, so I'm not going to use Imperial Purple. I know that Michael really loves this Carnival Purple for a similar type thing. I'm a little concerned that it's a bit dark, but okay, wow. A whole bunch came out. That just happens sometimes. So I'm going to be glazing essentially, and I'm going to be glazing strategically, so I'm not going to be putting the paint on everywhere. So to make it a little less runny here on my palette as well, I'm using brush on sealer as medium. Essentially, this is kind of like matte medium. You can glaze with just water, especially with Reaper paints. But I don't want to be going in like full strength, super dramatic with this. And often, like you can do this even with a slightly lighter color, or now it is a slightly lighter color because it's thinned down. But because it's a different color, it's going to have more of an effect than you think. So that's about where I am now. It might be a little thick, but I wanted to show opaque. It might be a little opaque, but I wanted to show up on the camera. So I think I'm just going to leave it as it is. So I think of this as spot glazing. So for example, I'm not going to go all over his skin. It would really show up on the lighter parts, like it would look purple. But if I just kind of pull it under in the shadowed muscle areas, it's going to add depth. It's going to look like there's more shading, and it's just going to be more interesting to look at, even though I'm not really adding a darker color. I don't want to add it to the spine. That's kind of too forward in area. This is a little subtle. I don't know if it's going to read on the camera at all. But purple, if you want to try this kind of color toning thing, purple is a pretty good color to do it with. It works on green, it works on red, it works on skin. It works on brown. You can use purple to shade yellow, but you might not be able to use like that straight up purple. But you might be able to. I just realized that I didn't hit his bracer with the lighter black colors. A little bit there. So it's really, there are occasions where for one reason or another I can't put purple on a miniature, and it's like really hard for me to like not do a step like this. I might even want to be as dark as this Kraken ink, but thin it down a little to go in this crevice of go in some of the crevices of the anvil, since that's so much darker than other things. And I'm gonna just go ahead and put some in the tree. Although there, because of the colors, it's a little more obvious, but I'm okay with it. Would blue be better shading for yellow? Purple is actually an excellent shade color for yellow. It's just that you might have to mix it in. Like this might just be too dark. Oh, let me get a yellow. Do I have a tree yellow? Yes. So really a great way to make a nice brown is yellow and purple. So let's get a blue as well. This is a fairly vivid blue. This one, yeah, that's more vivid, so we'll use that. And we'll just test the theory. Now, there's this concept called tinting strength. So tinting strength is how powerful is that color when you mix it with some other thing. Does it take over, or is it very mild? Yellow has a poor tinting strength, so adding blue, I didn't have to add much blue for that to turn into green. If I add a little more blue. So I'll try it with a less vivid blue, but you're probably always going to be like a kind of a green thing going on. I need a lot more yellow, I think, because of what I just said about the tinting strength. So I'll get just a little bit of that purple. And it makes a lovely brown. So rather than messing with orange or trying to find the right brown, I often prefer, I don't paint a ton of yellow, to be fair. But when I do, and in other media, I paint more in watercolors and stuff like that, and I paint a lot of yellow because I like to paint bananas and lemons. Typically, I'll do it that way with a purple. And let's try it with the Kraken ink, which may have too much black in it. I don't know if it's going to work, but... Oh, it turns out the Kraken ink actually has some blue in it because it's turning green. That's why it's fun to experiment. Can you use that for other warm colors as well? You mean mixing in purple? With orange, blue might work better because orange is the complement. So the reason yellow works, and I have my color wheel, and now it's gone. The reason yellow works is because purple is the complement of yellow. So if you were putting stuff in the shadows of orange, purple will work for other warm colors. It's really nice on red. Actually, I like to shade with purple a lot on red. I'll usually do it with, by the book colors, or I'll do like blue liner or something, and then come in and add the purple here. But you can add purple direct to red as well. I don't have, let's see, I do have a really true red over here. If I can find it. Because I have clear red. So let's find out what happens when we mix red and purple. And then, I seriously, I brought a color wheel here. So there we go. So complementary are the things that are the straight line. And you can use, I have one, I didn't bring it over here, but I bought it for doing these videos even. You can use the cyan, yellow, magenta, and it's going to tell you a slightly different color, and that's fine. It'll probably work too, because, this purple works, this purple would probably work, and this purple would probably work. So there's just kind of, this is a guideline. It's not like a rule book. This is based on theoretical perfect colors that don't exist, but it's a helpful guideline. And if you get one of these, which is just this is a pocket color wheel, the same company, the Color Wheel Company, creatively enough, makes a larger one too. But it has a lot of information. Like, you may not be able to read it on stream, but this tells you complementary colors, what split complements are. So split complements are, if I picked yellow and then I would use blue violet and red violet. So that's more of a color scheme thing. Most of these tetrads and triads, when they're talking about that, those are color schemes. And you can use the complements as color schemes as well, but they work for shading. Or mixing, if you want to mix your own browns or grays, mixing complements is a good way to do it. But purple just seems to be kind of magical in that it works with a bunch of colors, not just yellow. And that is one reason I like it. Plus, also, it's purple, so it's automatically awesome. All right, so that's a really true red, and mixing this purple in gives me a nice, attractive, darker red. And then a darker red, and then a darker red. So from a mixing point of view, having a couple of purples at your disposal is definitely going to pay dividends. So I was adding some purple to the shadows here. And I can come back and do additional coats if I felt like it didn't do enough. I could thicken this up and add a little more if I felt like it didn't do enough. But because I'm using a color that's not really there, I guess, like his green, I'm going to put on the green pants now. And there wouldn't be purple on the green pants. So I would prefer to go up cautiously than to add a bunch of purple and have it look weird. So I just did that leg versus that leg, and I think it does need to be a little thicker. It usually works pretty well on green. It's subtle. I mean, I do a lot of this kind of subtle thing where I try to take a color that I used in one place and add some of it to another place. I mean, there's not really much point in adding it to the black because the shadows of the blacks would be super dark. I'll give that a second to dry and we'll look at the back of his pants again. I don't think it would be safe to add it to his hair because that's like a neutral color and it's going to look purple. I'll do it in a spot and then take it off. Well, it's not even terrible. But it is more obviously purple than in the other parts of the figure. So maybe a little more thinned down or mixed with the shadow color. But I encourage you to try playing with some colors in your shadows. It can really add a lot of depth and interest or unify things. I'm going to take some of this Kraken ink one and add a little more shading to the metal. then I think I should get like a really bright silver and add a little bit of highlighting. It's hard when metallic areas are this small. This is kind of one of the things that non-metallic metal is often better at, is little areas of metal, because you can push the shininess and the shadows a little easier. Okay, are there other... Actually, I didn't put any purple in his face. Put that a little bit in the skin under his cheeks. Just a little bit at the side of the nose and near the eyes. And then I think since he's working at a hot forge, I'm going to try giving him just a little bit of a flush. And this I tend to thin way down. That might be too much, but it's really, it can be challenging to get this so it shows up, but it doesn't look like, you know, someone just took red pancake makeup and put it on their cheeks. I'll do the tip of his nose too. But I forgot that was clear red, so it actually probably needs a little more to show up. And this is something that probably won't show up on the video, but hopefully when I do the before and after pictures and put them on my blog, you'll be able to see it there. So that just adds a little saturation to his face, which I think is a good thing. I think he needed it. Add a little more lining again. So there would be a shadow, his hand would cast a shadow over that handle, the way he's holding it. Okay, so where are we time-wise? We have about 15 minutes left. So I don't know if you want me to keep fussing with him or answer some questions, or if you want me, do you have any questions about the MSP Open or how things work? I talked about the painters category, where we are really just looking at paint. There's sometimes some confusion about the other categories. One of them, well, okay, ordnance is pretty obvious. It's, you know, machines of war, basically, which I think would include anything from a catapult to a tank to like a space laser or whatever. But then there's diorama and open. So open is kind of, it's sculpting and painting. And I mention that because people will often put something in open. So this is actually, she's a small conversion because I lost the hand. So I had to go find the hand off some other figure and put a new hand on. And then there's some construction work here too. So the skeleton and this piece of, I don't know, castle, whatever it is, that's a piece from a Reaper figure that I do not currently recall what it is. Marcus Vampire Hunter. It may not even be available anymore. I think it was in the Master Series line. Anyway, that's a precast piece. So where the skeleton and the wood is attached and that little piece of arch or whatever. But I added these blocks. I took this skeleton and added him in. So I did some construction and stuff here. But if I put this in the open category, I wouldn't expect to make more than a silver. And maybe I wouldn't even make that. It's certainly in a historical contest, I would probably not make more than a bronze. And the reason for that is you have to remember in the open category, you know, gold plus is Derek Schubert. So it's someone who's completely sculpted their own figure and painted it to an amazing level. So the idea of open is that you've done some significant conversions, or you've done a lot of sculpting, or you've done like a very elaborate base. So this figure, I might actually do better if I put it in diorama, because there's a story here. I'm not entirely sure what the story is. Is she commanding those skeletons? Is she trying to get them to get away from her? Is she bemoaning her very poor fashion choices for going adventuring? There's some kind of story there. I'm not great at telling stories, so I might not get more than silver in diorama either, because I'm not great at telling stories, which is an example of, you know, something to think about if you're putting together entries, is that maybe you want the story to be a little clearer than something like this. But there are multiple figures and they're interacting, so I think it would be fine in the diorama category. The other reason I had this figure out, and this was something I was going to show with the bugbear, is if you look at it, you can kind of see her foot is floating. Now, it was originally glued down. The other foot is pinned, so it's still glued. This is the kind of thing, this is a little different than just having a scratch on your figure. So if you just have a scratch or a little ding, as a judge, I'm going to assume that happened while you were on the way to the con or when you were taking your figure out. This looks more like poor construction. So to make this figure look realistic, she should be attached fully to the base and her feet should look like they're sinking in the ground. So it's a real common problem to see, you know, someone's got something pinned and the foot's just floating a little bit above the ground surface. It's good to get a little putty or a little of that, you know, modeling paste or something, or whatever you use for doing your bases, and shove a little bit of that around the foot so that it looks like the foot is attached to solid ground. If there's gaps, you know, like if where I'd put this hand on, if there was a gap, you're losing presentation or workmanship consideration if you haven't addressed that. I mean, that is part of our craft, is trying to make things look realistic and complete. So that includes assembly and also painting basing materials. So, and this is something that tends to come up a lot with people the first few times they enter a contest. You know, you have gray gravel and you want it to look like gray gravel. So you don't paint it, but it doesn't look in scale with your figure. So whatever your groundwork is, even if it's the right color, you still like throw a wash on it, do a little bit of dry brushing. Then there's paint on everything and it looks in scale and unified. Now static grass is slightly different. You can still kind of like highlight the tops of static grass with some dry brushing and stuff. In fact, the year that I won, so the Reaper contest used to be like the top 3 style, and the year I won, like I think they called it Best in Show. It worked totally different then. It wasn't a voting thing. I almost didn't. So it was my miniature. It's a top 3 show. My miniature was in contention with the other best miniatures there. The rumor I've heard is that Anne thought I didn't dry brush the grass. So she was on the edge about whether, you know, I had earned that prize. And I guess I must have done something else well enough that she decided to overlook it. Hi, Corporia. Yes, she is angry. She's pretty ticked off. So, you know, for the painters category at ReaperCon, that kind of stuff isn't like super critical, although painting the base counts as part of painting. So that's not part of presentation and construction and workmanship. Like that we tend to be a little firmer about because that's part of painting. But, just to try to talk about the confusion with open, hey, Splintered Brush Studio. There's a lot of confusion sometimes with what open is. And open is you've done a lot of sculpting or construction or something. It's not just a slightly changed figure from the catalog. So that I don't even remember if I did enter her in open. I think I did so if you look at the gold NMM, I think I did the purple thing in the shadows there. Anyway, so I think that was most of, I think I addressed except his little bracer thing. I addressed the stuff there. So does anyone have any questions about how do you put feedback into practice? Questions about the MSP Open, or where you would enter, which category you would enter, or any kind of questions related to stuff that I have yammered about today? while I remember to fix his bracer. And most of the stuff I talked about, just about, I mean, the category specific stuff is specific to open contests, or the MSP Open in particular. Most open contests don't have a diorama. They have painters, open, and ordnance. And then the military shows divide that into like fantasy painters, fantasy open, and then historical painters and historical open. And fantasy includes horror and science fiction and stuff as well. So you'll see like some people do these really cool. I think they're 1-to-1 or they're close to life size like horror busts. They're super neat looking. And then you'll also see like 40K figures. So the Atlanta show is the one that I've attended the most. And that takes place in February. Usually, I think it's in the outskirts of Atlanta. And I would recommend going to that if you can. They're like a super friendly, welcoming group of people. They're happy to see, fantasy people start coming in and taking an interest in their shows. And then the MMSI, Military Model something Indiana. I don't know, that one's in Chicago. And that I think is in October or November. So that is coming up this year. So if you want to try going to one of these shows other than the MSP Open, that's something you could look at. So Valander asks, how would you judge an online entry where you have only 3 to 4 photos of 1024 by 1024? Pendrake, I don't remember what kind of figures the guy who painted with toothpicks did. I think they were like 54 millimeter. I think they were fantasy though. I don't think they were historical. So in an online contest, you can only judge by what you can see in the photo. So if the photo's really, like, people will make photos like this. They'll take a photo of this with their phone, and there's all this stuff in the background, and maybe the figure isn't even in focus. What can you do? You can only judge by what you can see. But I'm going to start with that same idea of, in the thumbnail, is it clear? Because it's hard to paint something where the contrast is good from a distance or in a small view, and where everything still looks good in a close-up view. I'm going to be looking at the color choices and whether let's take them off of here so you can kind of, I don't know if you can remember them from before, but I will take pictures and put them online at some point. Do the color choices work? Is there, have they done stuff like texturing that matches the materials that they're working on? If everybody's got the same constraints, then you're comparing apples to apples. So if one person's photographs, the smooth blends look a lot smoother and the textures look a lot cooler and texture-y than the other person's, then I'm giving them credit for having done well. I don't know if that answers your question, Valander, or if there was some kind of particular thing you were wondering about with the judging of that kind of contest. I know that when I have judged online contests, one of the big challenges is that sometimes you just can't tell with the photo. Like the photo is really dark, or it's really small, or this is another thing that happens. This will be the photo, and they haven't cropped all this stuff out. Even with phone cameras now, we should be able to get a little better photos than that. So I guess let me know if there are any other kind of things about the photo contest that you were wondering. Let's see where we are. So it is just about time to wrap up. I'm going to assume that Justin will have a raid. I don't have my screen yet. Hopefully he's happy because I got my graphic up. I don't have my screen because Ron said he was going to do them for me, and I haven't bugged him about it because I feel bad that he's so busy. Because he did the first one, so if I really wanted to match, he has to help me. So it's not that I was unaware of the screen problem. But I will just very briefly tell you what else you can enjoy. You can enjoy Monday to Fridays and at 11:30 a.m. in Central. All these times are in Central. Monday is me at 2 p.m. Central. Tuesday is the Crow's Nest at 5 p.m. Central. I'm not sure if we know yet who the guest is. Yes, we do. It's Sadie. It's Sadie from Painting Platinum, who also mixes the paint. And I'm super excited to find out more about what Sadie's got to say, because they're going to ask her some hard-hitting questions, I bet. Wednesday is Miniature Stand with Luca at 2 p.m. Thursday is the Crafty Creative with Josh Foreman? I knew I should have written it down. At 2 p.m. And then Reaper Live at 6 p.m. Then Friday we have Reaperland at 3 p.m. Some Fridays you also get Reaper Aaron Foreman, thank you, and or I can't remember what Aaron's airbrush show was called. But that's not this week. This week you just get Reaperland at 3 p.m. and then Saturday is Sadie's show. So once you meet her and discover how awesome she is on the Crow's Nest, you can come watch her show on Saturday at 3 p.m. Central. House of Vex, thank you. Which is also Aaron is like an amazing airbrush guru, and now I am no longer afraid of my airbrush. So definitely check that out. And thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate everyone showing up. Thank you, Julie or Bob. And hopefully you guys will be less scared to try doing something like this. Touch up a guy. Grab an old guy and just use your new skills on him. Okay, I took too long with the raid, so bye guys. See you next week.